Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak again. In this video coming up, I'm going to talk about why is there no unification in this hobby of ours. So stay tuned. Unification of this hobby. Why can't we in this hobby become unified? And if you go back, probably before a lot of you were born, but some of the old timers will know. In the 60s, 70s, if you went to an aquarium store, it was very cut and dry. Bought your aquarium, you bought an undergravel filter, they would sell you the substrate, which was basically just gravel of various sizes you could buy, very small all the way up to very large gravel. And it was explained to everybody that this is your biological. You put the 3 inches of substrate on top of the undergravel filter. That became your biological. You didn't worry about anything else in the aquarium being biological. Your substrate would take care of it. Then they sold you a filter, whether it's hang on the back, canister filter. It was never thought of to be any more than a mechanical filter. Never thought about biological. Or you had maybe a little box filter so big that you put in a small aquarium if you didn't buy a hang on the back or a canister filter. And that would be filled with filter floss and carbon. Hang on the back would be filled with filter floss, angel hair, or carbon. Canister filters, same way. Filter floss, carbon. That's the way everybody did it. It was pretty unified. It worked. It was simple. It worked. Your biological was your substrate, and your mechanical to help keep the water clean, a particulate matter and everything else was one of those hang on the back little box filter canister. Today, we seem to not be unified anymore. Those days have long gone. Manufacturers are part of the blame because they have changed the undergravel filters to become mechanical filters because they made them faster and faster with the water flowing through the substrate, that people complained that they became mechanical filters or pollution filters where they would get all the detritus and mum and fish waste. They would collect it in there. But it wasn't a big thing. We didn't think about it as a big thing because of the fact of it is you just clean your gravel every 6 months or whatever. And it was explained you can clean half of it and then the other half, and you can do it that way with a gravel cleaner. And it was not thought of as a big thing because this was your biological and didn't have problems. You would set it up, buy a light, but things started changing because the idea of how to set up aquariums started changing, because as substrates started changing, and they really, as people wanted more plants, and more plants became readily available. You had your Combamba, Hornworth, Anacharis. Those are your common plants you would find anywhere. If a store was able to carry something better than that, your Amazon swords, rarely would anyone carry any kind of lotus that you could buy. But as plants became more available to the hobbyists and more hobbyists got interested in plants, the undergravel filter, because it was bringing water in so quickly into the filter itself, just wasn't an ideal situation for plants. Plants don't mind having oxygen, and they don't mind having water pass through their root system, but it's got to be very slowly, not quickly. Plus the fact is, if you use gravel, it's inert and it's got nothing to benefit a plant. It's just gravel. And people then had to place some kind of fertilizer in the substrate. And back then, fertilizers were a tablet basically of nitrogen and phosphates, basically copying off of what terrestrial plants had, not what aquatic plants needed. And these tablets had been used probably since the 40s and 50s, and they just carried on. That was it. If you wanted live plants, some people would let their plants float, whatever. Wisteria was another plant, not as readily available as the other three, but basically things were unified. Then all of a sudden things started changing, especially when the saltwater hobby became more and more available in the 70s from Dr. Moe, and he introduced people to saltwater basically here in the United States. And then we went on to the wet dry filter, which was basically used for your mini reef aquariums. It trickled down to freshwater aquariums, so people start using it for freshwater. It helped the discus tanks. That helped. And the oxygen kick was afoot. And it just progressed to progress where you needed lots of oxygen and lots of filtering material to be highly oxygenated to do the nitrogen cycle. And it changed. The changes did more harm than good in the hobby. It started separating the hobby. We weren't unified anymore. This person was making now hang on the back filters that had little spinny wheels, which I think was Penguin did that. I don't know if they even make the spinny wheel little filter, but it was for biological. We started taking our mechanicals filters, making them into biological filters, and so on. Then the day came where we went back in time, regressed, and we turned around and people started just taking substrates that manufacturers were making, because the plant hobby was getting bigger and bigger and people wanted plants. They didn't want the artificial plants, they wanted real plants. So as plant hobby got bigger and bigger and greenhouses start growing them, they became easier to get. All of a sudden we regressed back into maybe the 20s, maybe the 30s, where people took their substrate and just threw it on the bottom of an aquarium. Now that became the norm. Everybody forgot the science that was in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s of undergravel filters. We forgot that science and just started throwing the substrate at the bottom of aquarium for fresh water and even saltwater now, because saltwater used to use undergravel filters too. They got away from that. The wet dry filters, they got away from too much nitrogen. They were nitrogen factories. So we kind of digressed instead of progress. And because of that, manufacturers had to compensate for what we were doing wrong. And they started making all kinds of mediums out there to turn canister filters and hang on the back filters into biological filters. Because when you threw the substrate on the bottom of the aquarium and then they planted their plants, because everybody told them you can't have fast water going past your plants. This was a way to do it. Now we had to compensate for this very cruddy biological filter we made in our aquariums, and manufacturers then start making all kinds of products to compensate for them. Okay, we all know what they are: little rings, sintered glass, ceramics that are fractured, like pumice stone, things like that. We started using, and we to this day using products like that. Or they're making hang on the back filters with little fins on them. This is going to help for bacteria growth, supposedly to help for biological growth, which that now applies to polymeric thermodynamics. I'll do a video of that, thermodynamics, polymeric thermodynamics, which is different mediums that you're using and how they react with bacteria. So that will be another video, polymeric thermodynamics. This is something that hobbyists never even hear about. They don't talk about it. It gets into a lot more than what you think. But anyway, so we can see this now. And what started coming up is people would clean their filters and they would have this big swing of killing their fish, or tanks would turn white, or after a filter change. And because we were depending so much on filters outside of the aquarium to take care of biological processes. And of course, once the sump came, and that was all, brought on because of, brought on because of the saltwater aquarium. Now we can use sumps for freshwater also. So they're making tanks with wares and stuff like that. Now we can use a sump for that. And we can add things in the sump that we want. And now filter socks and rolls you can add to these sumps, where the dirt goes into a roll. When the roll becomes filled up, it just rolls up with a new piece of the material there to help clean the aquarium. We're doing all this because the unity of biological was lost. And nobody wanted to go back to the old ways. And we have put ourselves in a position where everybody, it seems like in this hobby, is jockeying for a position to let you know how it should be done now. So when I started doing research on biological processes for ponds, because when you get into pond equipment, it escalates on the price of the equipment that we use. And basically, it's big, huge equipment that we use on our aquariums, but just bigger and costs more, thousands and thousands of dollars. And the way they were doing ponds still replicated that of aquariums. It's just made it bigger. Where they use lava rock or something, the water would go through that. They still use that old way of doing things, not understanding really the processes of how a natural system works. And when I started working on the anoxic filter, I did it for ponds, and we made the BCB baskets, biocenosis clarification baskets, and we used clay and laterite, and I did this myself. And when I say we, because I had beta testing facilities, chemists, other hobbyists were going to help me out, do their ponds. And once we came up with a substrate that worked correctly, the way it should have been designed. And remember, back then, products weren't easy to get. Baskets that you use for your ponds had to be get from Australia. A laterite had to be gotten from Germany, from Dupla. It's the only people who sold laterite back then, because people didn't understand microbiology enough. So once these elements came together and we put them in ponds, made a BCB basket, and like my pond, for example, had 21 of those baskets in a filter I made, it worked. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I wasn't surprised, but it worked. And therefore, I loaded up the pond to see how much fish load it could take, and it could take quite a lot of fish load. And it was very easy and very inexpensive, and it made anoxic conditions. And it's like, wow, this is great. Why hasn't somebody already come up with this idea? Well, nobody did come up with the idea. And I used to have some big fish and very old fish. So that is what got started me on the anoxic. And then it's like, well, if it works for ponds and these huge animals that we are keeping in our pond, and as much as we're feeding them, and it causes very little problems, keeps your water clean, and people who were using it and the people who were testing it said, wow, this is great, and the price is next to nothing, and it's easy to maintain, it doesn't clog up, so you're not doing that kind of maintenance. All you need is a pre-filter, and clean your pre-filter. That's it. You don't have to worry about your filter clogging up. And people loved it, those who used it. Of course, we had the other side of the fence where people would come and look at it and they just couldn't believe it. Really, they're, especially where in Illinois, in the koi club and stuff that I belong to, people just could not grasp it. They couldn't believe it. Oh, that can't work. You got to use the high-tech equipment. And what I notice is people that like to use the high-tech equipment, they'd like other people to use what they're using, the high-tech equipment. You know, if you're going to have a koi pond, you have to have this extremely high-tech equipment. Otherwise, you can't have koi. You know, some people would say that's a little snobbish, but that's how they were. They were, you know, you have to do it this way. And it was extremely expensive and lots of maintenance. So here you have a system with extremely low maintenance. It doesn't clog and does everything their very expensive system did. That didn't set well with people. I mean, really, it you know, I'm spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a filtration system, and you made a filtration system for about, you know, $100. You know, that doesn't set well with people. To this day, we have kind of like the same problem, because at that time I thought, what happened to our aquariums? What happened to the ideas we had, how we did things with sewage treatment facilities and things like that? And that's how the Plenum came out and was explained. But I found out that the Plenum could be made better. And we needed to understand the biological processes to it. Because the way that Chaubert presented the Plenum, which was just basically a 1-inch void with about 3 inches of substrate or whatever, and that was it, where I said we need to get water movement, but very slowly, because I got the idea from the BCB baskets, because water would move in the filtration system very quickly, and it would just flow over the baskets, around the baskets, under the baskets, And that would do your filtration. That's all that was needed. And you got to thinking, well, how do these insalts, ions and stuff, and insalts that we have in our pond, how are these baskets utilizing it, since there's no way we're moving water through it? And the water movement was going around it. So this gave me an idea with the plenum that, what if we took a plenum and just added, and it was advocated that you shouldn't do this, really. And I said, well, what if we put something onto the plenum just to move a little bit of water out of the plenum? And that would cause displacement. So now you have the aquarium water, you have your substrate, and now you have a void of water underneath that. Okay, so you have 3 elements now. Not 2 elements when you put your substrate directly in the bottom, but now you have 3 elements. And in the bottom element, we need to move water out slowly. And I found out that a small bubbler of 3/8 in diameter was good enough for a very large aquarium. And we started doing some tests. I had some people started testing. We started testing with several tanks, and we found out it worked. Wow, they had it right in the very beginning, I said. You know, that back in the 40s when they had the filter plates and the little bubbler, but they took that away, needed to move more and more water. But actually, water doesn't need to move that quickly through a substrate, but it needs to move. And what they didn't know back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, before they changed over to 1-inch lift tubes and then power heads and everything else, and finally they just, you know, took the whole idea and just shit canned it, where people were putting their substrate on the bottom, is that water movement at a slow rate to allow different kind of conditions to exist within the substrate was more biological filter than what we needed. We were using our tank substrate as biological, which started out in the hobby and everybody agreed to that. So this is how it really evolved, where through research we came up with how this was to be done. And this wasn't willy-nilly. This was research we did and found out that, hey, it worked. Just like the BCB baskets work. What is the repeatability? And the repeatability was over 90%. That is damn good. And it controlled algae problems and everything else. And then I start finding out that we have all these anoxic zones with growing facultative bacteria. So we have a different kind of bacteria we are growing. We have your aerobic bacteria that's taking in insalts, breaking down ammonia into nitrites, just like it's supposed to. As the water and oxygen get used up, we have a different kind of bacteria as the oxygen level drops that takes over. The same bacteria that was in a BCB, guess what? That bacteria seemed to want to take care of nitrates and phosphates. It's like, wow, we completed the nitrogen cycle by bacteria. We finally did it. You know, and I was happy that we finally did it by using old methods and some new ones that were brought up to us by a Plenum, and the under gravel plate could be used, or you can just make yourself an easy plenum out of a crate and screening, and all you need is something to lift it up. So as these ideas progressed, other ideas were filtering in to the hobbyists, and we all know that if you're told to clean your canister, if you're told to clean your hang on the back, you got to clean it in tank water, and you got to do that's because you're using those filters as biological and mechanical, and there's no reason. Long time ago, those were just mechanical filters. And if they became biological, okay. If they didn't, that was okay too. So you take like what I've been showing you, my 90 gallon. I have a big, huge 88 filter on there. It pumps over close to 500 gallons an hour. It gets clogged up. I turn around. I take it over to the sink. I clean it. Anything that could be cleaned, like a sponge or something I'm going to reuse and don't have to buy again, I clean it out real good with a garden hose or whatever. Anything that's like a floss or anything to help pick up the micro particles, I don't worry about that. I just throw them away. I don't clean my filters in a bucket of aquarium water because that is not my biological filter. It wasn't designed to be a biological filter. It was designed to be mechanical. But today we're using these as biological filters. I put a BCB basket in mine. The basket never has to be touched. It now becomes a biological filter. And I've done both as a Plenum and a BCB just to see what will happen in an aquarium. Use both means of filtration. And I set it up as mechanical, yet the BCB that's in my filters, my 88 filters, acts as biological also. But in reality, I don't need it because a lot of people ask me, what's more important, the BCB or a Plenum? And I say, a Plenum is, because it will do all your biological for you. All you need to do now is make something mechanical to help keep your water sparkling clean, something that you could add your carbon to, something you can add, like I showed you in my video, like Dick Boyd's, generic Dick Boyd's, where I mix carbon with resin and things like that. Something where you can add a canister filter where you can add maybe some phosphate remover pads or something. That's all that should be used for. You don't really need to think of canisters or hang on the back filters as biological anymore. You should be able to pick one up, clean it out real good, and put it back. But manufacturers have changed. What I mean by we can't unify is the fact of it is nobody can get on the same page that everybody now, as years have gone by. We can't tell somebody how to set up an aquarium and everybody agrees to it anymore. No, you got to do it my way. 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 My way's better. Don't listen to them. My way's better. And in an interview with Father Fish, as he said, 90% of the people drop out. And that makes sense. They drop out because they can't get the right information. They don't know what to do. I'm hearing from one from column A, one from column B, one from column C. I don't know what to do. And they're trying these different things out, but they're not asking the hardball questions when somebody comes up with something like they have me and say, well, how does this happen? What if this happens? What if this happens? Just like the Harvard chemist that came up to me and said, if the power goes out, you still have a biological filter. And I kind of looked at him, and said, yeah, how did you know that? He said, by the way you're setting it up. He says, and then his wife said, he's a chemist, graduated from Harvard. Oh, that's why you understand what I'm talking about. Because I worked with a chemist that we had to do a job for clay substances for the government. Anyhow, so I thought, yeah, because if you use a plenum in an aquarium, like I described, and the electricity goes out, even if it goes out for days, even if it goes out for weeks, it's still working. It doesn't die BCB baskets, they don't die. Because remember, that bacteria is dimorphic, and it changes its oxygen requirements and food requirements to what's ever available. It's not like our autotroph neighbors that can't. And if there is no oxygen, they starve and die. These become dimorphic. They will switch over their oxygen needs to phosphates, nitrates, anything that carries oxygen, they'll steal it from. Food sources, they go for other food sources where they're not just for one narrow food source. So that was another good thing we found out, that you can literally take a tank with a plenum, and let's say you have a little bubbler on, let's say the electric goes out, even if it went out for a week or two, your biological filter doesn't die. Now this was proven several times, but one guy over in the United Kingdom said how his daughter had helped him with with BCB baskets and everything, and he had a goldfish in his house and stuff like that, and she forgot to turn the pump on. And he said it was like that for a long time, several days before he noticed she forgot to turn the pump on. He said, oh my gosh, you know, the ammonia levels skyrocketed. She forgot to turn the filter on. So he turned it on. He wrote me and said, what should I do? I said, just turn it on. It's okay. You know, he would, oh, my filter's dead. I said, no, your filter's not dead. Turn it on. Let it run now. But it's been off for several days. Turn it on. So he turned it on. He said, I'm going to do water change. I'll do like a 40% water change. That's good. Get the ammonia level down, you know, do a water change. He said he couldn't believe it. Magically, the filter kicked right back in, took care of the ammonia, took care of the nitrates, took care of the phosphates, took care of the nitrites. What would have turned into a disaster, it didn't. And, you know, he wrote me back and said, everything's fine. You know, the bacteria never died. I said, no, it won't. Because it will utilize either through electrical charge, convection, diffusion, even in your aquariums, it will still work and utilize and move what's in the aquarium through the substrate. And hopefully, if your electric went out and you're worried, the biggest thing you'll have to worry about is, will the tank remain warm enough? Other than that, you don't have to worry about the biological processes, because we are not, the facultative bacteria will start increasing as the food stuff increases and availability to that bacteria. It will start increasing, and it will overtake any of the aerobic bacteria that exist. You understand? So as the aerobic bacteria begins to die off after so many hours of without oxygen, the facultative bacteria says, thank you very much for giving us more room, and they just grow throughout the substrate very quickly. Remember, they're heterotrophs, so they will multiply within minutes, start going and creating more and more cells. The other bacteria are going to start dying. These bacteria start growing. You see how it works in a BCB basket or a plenum? It gives you a cushion there. And if you think about it, if you had an aquarium that had like lots of plants and they can't photosynthesize, they're not going to be bringing a lot of oxygen or anything else into their root systems because you have no light. So they're not going to be able to photosynthesize. Now what do? None of your motors are running, none of the air pumps are running, but your whole biological filter has not died. It continues. This is the science. This is how it works. This is how natural systems work. So it sounds simple, but why can't anyone get unified on it? Everyone's got their own ways. They want to advocate their own way. And if you think about it, people, if you think about it, if we became more unified and got more people to do things, people like Aquarium Co-op, they could make good money. If you think about it, he could be selling things that could make him more money than what he's making. Other stations could be utilizing ideas that could advocate and help hobbyists out instead of 90% of them dying. Because a lot of people that I get on my station, I hate to say this, are people that use the mud systems. And I've seen a couple YouTubes on different mud systems, how they went south, or other systems that they said they did use and they worked for a while, but then they didn't, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. People who just put their substrate on the bottom of aquariums. These are a lot of people that are watching this channel versus now that, because they've tried that and they weren't very successful with what they tried. Because we're not unified. Unfortunately, will this hobby ever become unified? I don't know. Because everyone seems to be jockeying for their position. My way's right, that way's wrong, this way's right, that way's wrong. It gets so confusing for a new hobbyist to pick and choose. And like I showed you some of the pictures, some of these people have written to me saying, I was in the hobby, I got out of the hobby, I found your videos, I got back into the hobby. They started doing research, and they came to this and said, hey, you know, what you're talking about makes more sense than what I heard from others. And that's what I mean by unification. We need to get on the same track like we used to. You bought it on a gravel filter, you bought your substrate, everybody did it that way. We all knew that was your biological. Boom, done. That was your biological. Now, what do you want? You want pumps, you want canisters, what do you want for your mechanical? We're not that way anymore. Because so many people, hobbyists, are advocating that because they are successful, you should do it my way. And they're not putting into account those who aren't successful in the hobby and those who drop out. And if all that, what I'm saying, was so successful of those different ways of doing things, and we had a lot of success back in this 60s and 70s when we used under gravel filters. I talked to a lot of old-time hobbyists. They said, heck, I set those tanks up and I never did nothing to them. But yeah, I did the same thing. If the success rate today, and you have to think about that, and if Dr. Fish is true, or Father Fish, I'm sorry, his name's Father Fish, sorry about that. If he's true, if 90% of the people drop out, that means they're not working. The advice people are getting isn't working because the dropout rate is too high. Now, I have always understood the dropout rate in this hobby is 3 to 5 years, and that's because people just get tired of doing it. And as time has went on, though, that dropout rate has increased instead of decreased. And the more technology we get, why is it increasing the dropout rate versus decreasing? People should be more successful. Their time in the hobby should be longer. Instead of 3 to 5 years, it should be 10 years, 15 years, but it hasn't. It's decreased as time goes on. Yet people spend more and more money on the products that they're buying. And the biggest culprit, I think, I could be wrong, and someone could make a comment, is basically they get a tank and it's either just too much work, too much algae just destroying everything. They spend too much money on plants. Their plants are disintegrating before their eyes. Plants do that as the leaves get older. That's just how natural plants are. You know, that's the way they are. You get an old leaf, it could be around for months, and then all of a sudden it starts disintegrating. This is a plant's life, okay? But they complained that, oh, I had crypt, it disintegrated. I had this, it disintegrated. My plants are disintegrating. The system is collapsing. You know what? I'm tired of it. I'm throwing the towel in. I'm done. I've had enough of it. All the advice I'm getting is wrong advice. You know, you go to fish stores, they give you the wrong advice. Yeah, you know, I'm tired of it. And you can understand, but the rate is increasing. And that's the scary part, because we're not unified. Nobody wants to be unified in this hobby. I don't understand why. We have the science. We understand it. It's been proven. Still, we can't get people unified on the whole thing. I don't know whether it's the internet has done it to us, destroyed us. I don't know whether it's manufacturers with their outrageous claims of what filters can do, and the products they're making have outrageous claims that this is going to do this and this is going to do, you know, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. But as we get more advanced, it seems like more and more people drop out and spend tons and tons of money to become disinterested in the hobby. It's just, that's what this video is about. Unification. We're not getting unified. Nobody wants to talk to each other. Nobody wants to discuss things. Nobody wants to, you know, it's my way or the highway. I've never thought that way. Hey, if you like a different way, do it. Go ahead, do it. I'm successful. I set up my 90-gallon aquarium, which is in previous videos for you. I show you how to do it. I set up my 20-gallon, my 90-gallon. I've set up hundreds of tanks this way. All successful. I have even older videos from 2017 and 2000. Set up the tank this same way. I show you with a Plenum. Had discus, did great. Setting up my tank this way. BCB baskets, did great. There's no more I can do, you know, for the hobbyist. I can't. I can teach you, but I can't make you learn. That's how it is, because we can't get unified, and that's the shame part. That is really the terrible part of this hobby, because it makes people aggravated. It really, you know, some of the letters and stuff I get. Yeah, I used to do that, and you know, I got sick of the algae. I tried that, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. And there's a lot of information out there that people now have to sift through to see which one fits me and which is the right way. Of course, you'll always have the people who will say, and this is what confuses people, well, there's all kinds of different ways of doing things. Yeah, but at a 90% failure rate, apparently we need to weed out the different ways that really don't work as they advocate. We need to weed that out, I think, in this hobby. If it doesn't work as they advocate, we need to weed that out, because it is destroying the hobby. Because I get information from all over the world of people telling me stuff that I never knew. I use this method. I use this method. I'm not going to bring them up here. And it failed. Now I'm using your method and everything's going fine. And now I'm setting up several tanks. And now I'm on my 17th tank, setting it up your way. I mean, because I try to, in these YouTube videos, explain the science behind what I am doing and how it really works, so you, the hobbyist, can better understand it. Anyhow, that's what this video is just about, unification. We can't seem to come to terms anymore and be unified and say, this is the way you set up a tank. It's not that way anymore. Why did it change? How did it change? Was it the manufacturers that did it? Was it other people that did it that didn't know better? I can't answer that question. All I can say is we need to get back to basics. We need to learn a little bit more about microbiology, how we set up our aquariums. We need to get back to your substrate is your biggest means of biological filter you can ever have in your aquarium. That is a huge biological filter. So you don't have to worry about your hang on the backs. You don't have to worry about your canister filters. You don't have to worry about your sumps. You got a biological filter. So that's what this video is about. Thank you for watching. I think a lot of people would agree with me. There is no unity in the hobby anymore. There used to be, and everybody had their tank set up the same. Not anymore. Everybody's got all different kinds of methods now of doing it. And that's what is a shame of the hobby. I really feel bad for the new hobbies coming in, because you can't watch every YouTube out there. You don't know who to pick. You don't know what to do. So you're grasping at straws. Hopefully you're going to get the right information. So that's what this video is about. I'm going to have a video coming up on thermodynamics, which nobody has ever talked to you about. How did we get into polymeric materials? How did we get away from it? What did manufacturers do? How did they try to solve these problems? And I'll be getting into that. That will be getting into a little more of chemistry of what happened into this hobby, as far as why things changed with manufacturers to make money. And that's the only thing I can really say, to make money. That's all I can think of. It was basically to make money. Let's be honest. So I'll be getting into that, thermodynamics. And I appreciate you watching my channel. Really, those who subscribe, thank you very much.